Hey everyone, welcome to the Troy Christian High School Chapel Podcast. At the end of this episode, please take a moment to subscribe to our Chapel YouTube channel and follow our Chapel Instagram account. Those two places will be the easiest way to check out what's coming up, as well as find some bonus content from our speakers and worship team. Most importantly, I hope the following message challenges and encourages you to grow in your relationship with God as you learn to love God and love others better. Enjoy. Hey, welcome back to the Troy Christian High School Chapel Podcast. This week we have Mr. Robby Lybarger on the podcast. He spoke last week in chapel. Robby, you are here. You're an alumni of TC. You're like from kindergarten, right?
From infancy.
Infancy.
Like the ECEC.
Wow.
Through, it's clear that, I just never moved on, I guess. So.
Yeah, you took a hiatus for college,
right?
For 4 years and for 3 years.
3 years, yeah. I couldn't even wait 4 years to get back here.
Dude, just like hammered. He had to get through college quick to get back here.
Yeah,
that's good. And you have been. What is this? Is this your second?
My second
year teaching now?
Yes.
Freshman and sophomore Bible.
Right.
All right. And you are married to Ketley, what's Lybarger now?
Right.
Ketley Miller, who is also an alumni and also teaching at the elementary. Yeah, that's
grade.
Awesome.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about getting back into what's it like going from like alumni back into like teaching. Obviously, I made the transition, but it's been a long time ago. T. Royce made that transition. Tim made that transition. Right. This is wild. So what's it been like for you?
It's definitely weird coming back when all of your teachers are still here. And so you know that you're not a student, but you still I feel like see them sometimes and like flinch in a way that it's like.
Why are you flinching?
Flinching, I don't know.
Are you guilty?
Teachers here, they're, intimidate. No, okay. But it's definitely weird in that way. I think the biggest thing like coming back that surprised me was seeing how not divided, but how intimidated freshmen are of kids that are 2 years older than them. In any other aspect of life, those 2 to 3 years really make no difference. And I kind of forgot about how divisive, not divisive, but how different the classes are in social status. And they're I can't talk to a senior. I'm scared of them. I'm like, yeah. Are you serious? You're the same. You're essentially the same age. But so that's been funny getting back into it. But I don't know, mostly it almost just those 3 years make it feel like it's almost been continuous. It's kind of weird like that.
Yeah, that's cool. You definitely get a different perspective of, as a student, you see things one way.
Right.
And then you come back and you kind of see it from a different perspective, even if it's only been 3 years.
Right.
Things just look different from your vantage point. Who as you're thinking you're coming back, just interacting with teachers and things like that, has there been any surprises as a student you saw this teacher this way, but now as a colleague you're like, oh wow, they're different than what I saw them as a teacher?
I don't know. I feel like I could see the teachers pretty well. I guess one thing that maybe this is kind of standard is sometimes students are a little intimidated by Mrs. Kathy Sloan.
Oh,
and I think, hopefully they figure out by the time they're seniors how nice she is. But I think I knew that by the end. But definitely coming back, you see that she's not scary like she is with the freshman study hall, that she's just a super nice woman. So, that's one thing to see differently, I suppose. Yeah.
That's cool. That's good. How have you been? How's Bible class been going? How do you like the process of just teaching Bible, with freshmen and sophomores? How's that been?
Yeah, it's been mostly good. It's funny to come back and teach younger students after studying it at the college level and preparing myself to know that not that you're dumbing it down, but you're simplifying things, obviously. But then coming back and realizing, oh yeah, I was nuts when I was 14 or 15 years old, and tried to navigate that in class of okay, I've tried to teach them, but at the same time, you can't be so rigid, especially in Bible class, and kind of forgetting, I don't know, that aspect of things of they're here to have fun. They're trying to learn a little bit, but also they're also trying to just be wild all the time.
Right,
Not
right.
the sophomores though. It's crazy how much the sophomores had them last year. And I thought, man, these kids are insane. And then 1 year later, and I can't even get them to talk at all. So
that's funny. Just a transition there.
yeah, the personality change there.
Yeah. It's interesting to see from junior high all the way through senior that progression of maturity that takes place,
Right.
And how that kind of manifests itself here. It's good. It's good to see. Well, you got last week you spoke in chapel. We're in this series called Focus, and it really is kind of working through this process of if Christ is the light of the world, how do we maintain a focus as we're trying to follow him? How do we stay kind of locked in? And what you brought in the middle of this series is this idea of there's the light of Christ, but there's also these other things that are drawing our attention that oftentimes become distractions for us from the real light of Christ. So talk us through a little bit about, you specifically brought up two specific areas, greed and vanity, as being like these are two distractors, if you will, or these are two of those like kind of false lights that really can easily draw us away from our focus on Christ. What is it about those two that came to the forefront of your mind that popped out for you that made you kind of go in that direction?
Yeah. I definitely think, the root of both, if you want to narrow down even further, is selfishness, which is kind of like a natural inclination for us. But I think, like always through life, you're moving somewhere. There's no neutral. You're either going like forwards or backwards or towards something or away from something. And so if we want to talk about, why those things draw us in, I think it's partly because they give you something to work towards. So this idea of greed is like you're working towards having more. And you think if you can accomplish that, and we're very much like achievement-oriented people, I think, especially like in our current context, that if you can have more, if you can achieve more, then you'll be happy. And obviously, in a world where everybody's trying to sell you something, the narrative that you get told every day is that you need more, that if you don't have that product, then you're deficient, and that you need to buy that because they're trying to sell it to you.
Yeah.
And then vanity, I think vanity is huge, especially at a young age. Really it's tied into greed in a sense, but I guess as an adult too, I kept saying granity and veed almost like every time in chapel, and I just said it again.
You said it in chapel?
I'd stop myself, but yeah. So I don't know why those words are stumbling over me, but I'd be like,
awesome.
But yeah, back to vanity, not granity. I don't know, like we talked about just a second ago with the freshman senior thing, being intimidated. Not that that's necessarily vanity, but like this idea of social status is so crucial, especially in high school and even so out in adult world, I guess that, that's another thing we can work towards is maybe not, having more, but appearing a certain way to people. And especially, people harp on social media all the time, and it's good, it's bad. It's kind of neutral. It's how you use it. But ultimately, like the strength or a weakness, you could say, of social media is that you can make yourself appear however you want. And so, what a tool for vanity. And it's the thing that we're on all the time. Like when kids are picking up their phone, they're either on TikTok, Instagram, probably not Twitter or Facebook, or playing Among Us for sure. Yeah. But it's this idea that you can make yourself seem a certain way that can be so appealing to us. And so I think that's why vanity and greed draw us in so much, because they work us towards something that we think is going to improve our life. And I think those narratives are placed on us far more than the idea of like Jesus is going to improve your life, right? I think maybe sometimes we think, we don't think about Christianity as being the whole, but we think of it as being the part, or maybe we claim it to be the whole, but it's really only a part. That Christianity is just like one of several labels that we might put on ourselves that, oh, I'm a Christian, but does that really mean that Jesus is our focus, or does that mean Jesus is something that we believe in, but ultimately it's about us, right? That Christianity as a label is still about you unless you make it about Jesus, right? Sometimes we even use Christianity to build up our vanity, to appear righteous, like the Pharisees, or even some people manipulate Christianity for greed too. You see
absolutely
like televangelists and things that are really playing on people's weaknesses to get them to give them all this money. And I mean, it's sad, but we spend anything for ourselves. And ultimately, if we can't get ourselves out of the way, then Jesus is never going to be the center of our focus.
Yeah. And it seems like, kind of where you're leaning on is, so those just are, it's just very clear,
right?
The result to us of what those things kind of bring into our lives. And it's like you said, our culture, that is the narrative of our culture. Both of those two things are, right? It's how people perceive you, and it's what is the next thing that I can get to fix the, whatever's going on in my life right now. What did high school Robby, was it one of those two things, or was it something else? What did high school Robby, what was a distractor? What was a false light that high school Robby had to deal with?
Oh, Lord.
It's getting real.
It probably depends, I guess, on which grade I was in. I mean, I can see, I look at them and think it's funny that they're intimidated, but I know that me from freshman to sophomore to senior year is just really dramatically different.
I remember like freshman, sophomore Robby, because you were in student council.
Right.
Didn't talk.
Yeah, that's true.
Like wouldn't say two words.
Paid as a quiet person.
Much different than senior Robby.
Oh yeah. Yep. I mean, you get that confidence, I guess. But this is a sidetrack, but Bonnie Weatherald, Miss Bonnie from the threes class, she was like my threes teacher, and she emailed me when I got a job here and was like, "Oh, I just can't believe it. You're a teacher. We couldn't get you to speak literally at all as a 3-year-old, and now you're a teacher." So I guess
now
that's
you
been
speak for a living.
Yeah, I know. Now I'm talking all day.
Yeah.
Still don't like it, honestly. I mean, I like teaching. I don't love talking all the time, but so what I struggled with in high school, oh man, I'd say is more vanity than greed. I think probably wanting to appear a certain way. I don't know. I think I probably earlier on in high school got into some relationships more so for like selfish reasons than like actually, being mature enough to contribute positively to a relationship for the other person. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that's vanity, to build up my ego, I don't know, maybe even as a quiet person, like I never felt like, I had to be the loudest person to feed into my ego or my vanity, but probably in other ways it built into that. I mean, honestly, like, well, I think transitioning into an upperclassman and taking on more roles and like ministry kind of leadership with men prep and chapel community and things like that, and speaking in chapel, obviously that was mostly positive for my life, but I definitely think there was still temptation there to let that be about vanity. I think even now, like anytime you get up on stage in front of people or even in a small classroom, it can be about vanity if you're not careful. That, it's a constant checking of my motivations of like, Lord, am I doing this solely for you, or am I more concerned about how I'm going to appear or sound to all these people when I'm speaking? Can I deliver, the best message to be everybody's like favorite chapel, or, how do I appear, as a senior? Like, do people see me as a spiritual leader rather than like what's actually in my heart? We were just reading a psalm in my class today from David, Psalm 40, and he says something along the lines of like, Lord, you don't desire burnt offerings or purification offerings. You don't require these things or sacrifices. But he says, here I am, Lord, and I'm one who delights in doing the will of the Lord. And so it's this idea of, it doesn't matter like what you appear to be, if you can make a show of it, because ultimately like that can still be about you. It's all about the motivations of, am I doing this just because I really delight in the Lord, or am I doing it for my own vanity? And I think that's the subtlety that makes it so difficult that I talked about, that sometimes we think we're following Jesus, right? But really we're fooling ourselves when we're still doing it for ourselves.
Yeah. And that sometimes it's hard to pick up in ourselves. Like it's not necessarily a defined line where it's very clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes it's both. And, a lot of times, I feel like a lot of times there is a desire to want to do something out of a pure heart to want to please God, but there's always that.
There's always going to be a vanity.
Yeah, there's always going to be that's going to be a struggle.
And I think something important to know with that is just that you can't like let that fear of your motivations being corrupt stop you from still doing a good thing, because ultimately then, I mean, you're missing out on that opportunity of, even if you know that like you're getting up to speak and, you want to do it for God, but you also like are never probably going to completely clear out that part of vanity because we're human and we're broken in some sense. And so, I don't know, I guess it is like just walking that line and making sure that you're doing the right things for the right reasons, but accepting the fact that it's not going to be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what this is trying to draw us into is how do we make, like, our goal is to make Christ the center of our life. You talked about that in your chapel. But how do you do that on a practical level? And you're already alluding to that to some degree just by a simple check of your motivation, but what does that look like? What are the other ways that we actively choose to make Christ the center of our life? What does it look like on a practical level?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tough. I think, like we've kind of alluded to, self-awareness is definitely the first step. Like sometimes we don't even know, right? And so maybe just reflecting for a while and thinking about, okay, where do I really stand in relation to this of, where are my disappointments? Like what's bothering me in life? And should that really be bothering me if like my joy, my peace, my confidence, my strength or passion, if those things are coming from Christ and Christ is constant, then like why is all this else going on in the world bothering me so much is like an indication that maybe Jesus isn't your light or Jesus isn't completely Lord. And I'm stealing that from Charlie at City Church, those ideas. He brought that up like last January, and it's always been on my mind since then of like checking, okay, do I have confidence, peace, joy, passion? And if I don't, like what's inhibiting that? And that's probably the thing that I'm looking to be the light, which is ultimately deficient. And so that's for awareness. But, once we're aware, like, you still have the problem. You're just aware of it. Yeah. I don't know. I think how you spend your time is not just a good indicator, but a way that you can actively like fight against these things. I guess, screen time will expose anybody, when you look on the iPhone, but
that's the truth.
It's hard to say, like, realistically, are you going to spend like hours in prayer a day to balance out the hours of day you spend on TikTok? I don't think so. But maybe as you're trying to determine your purpose in life, making sure that whatever you have defined as your purpose is not something that's self-seeking, but it's something that's like actively giving up. So one, I guess this is a little bit separate. One idea of like fighting selfishness, which ultimately is the biggest distraction for us from Christ, is by being generous, even if you don't want to be. Right? There's this whole idea of like, if our feelings direct us towards these false lights, then how do we fight against feelings? It's not just by willpower. Right? You don't will yourself out of anything, really, very, very rarely. And sometimes we're afraid to do actions that we feel like are disingenuous, just like we talked about with the motivations a little bit earlier, checking your motivations and trying to make sure they're right, but don't be afraid to not do it just because not all of your motivations are right. If you don't love somebody that you should love, it's not fake to do something loving for them, right? There's a quote that I feel like it's been attributed to a few different people, but it's the idea of it's true to say that feelings of love lead to actions of love, but it's truer to say that actions of love consistently lead to feelings of love. And so if we want to make Jesus the light, or we want to make Jesus Lord, then maybe it's not just willing it to be that way, but to commit to actions that actively either direct us toward Christ or actively put down our like selfish motivations, right? So maybe you're not spending hours of prayer a day, but maybe you're going out and doing things that combat your selfishness, that going out and spending your time serving the poor or feeding the hungry and doing these things because ultimately Jesus says, whatever you've done for the least of these, you've done for me. And when he's separating out in Matthew, the goats and the sheep on the left and his right, he doesn't say, who had, the greatest will in their heart that I'm Lord. It's who did all these things. And they say, what are you talking about, Jesus? We never saw you naked and clothed you. We never saw you sick and healed you. We never saw you hungry and gave you food. And he says, it's whatever you've done for the least of these. And so, actively just being a servant and putting yourself out there into these situations, not only does it like the thing we've been called to do, but it shapes who you are by the action.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the question is, if Christ is at the center of your life should look more and more like Christ.
Right.
And so I guess the starting point would be, do you know what the life of Christ looks like? Do you know what Christ looks like? Do you know what he said, what he did? And is your life progressing more and more towards that? Or is it progressing more and more towards something else?
Because that picture can get skewed.
It very easily can. It gets hijacked a lot of times for a lot of different reasons. It's kind of like what you said before. Robby, thanks for sharing in chapel. This is this is one of those things that we have a very short time to kind of, present an idea in chapel.
Right.
But really, these ideas have to be unpacked and have to be worked through in a way that we can begin to really wrestle with them and then reflect and implement ways that we need to grow, especially if we're going to take this following Jesus life seriously. And so those conversations are so helpful. So I love that you're back on staff. It's awesome to see. I love that you're able to come and share with us in chapel, and really, really appreciate it. Guys, thanks so much for joining us in this week's podcast, and continue to come back, check us out. We've got the last chapel of our series with Lydia Rowe coming up this next week, so look forward to that. And then we'll hear from her next week as well, just kind of unpacking the rest of this Focus series. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.